It is said, with reference to the spirit of healing, a mythical being known for its ability to connect with all things in the world and perform miracles, that it possesses immense beauty and power, which is why humans revere it as a goddess. Someone reflects that, given such a legendary reputation, the spirit of healing must also be capable of curing his creature, Catlas. It becomes clear that the creature is a dragon, gazing intently at a glowing circle beginning to form. He calls upon the spirit of healing, invoking the name of the great Lord of Time, and demands that it reveal itself. He adds that, if granted the power he seeks, he is prepared to offer a worthy price in return. With urgency, he implores the spirit to respond and appear at once. As the summoning ritual reaches completion, a young man is seen lying on a bed, stunned and confused by what is happening. The man and the dragon exchange bewildered glances. The dragon, puzzled by human standards of beauty, remarks how surprised he is that the one who appeared is just an ordinary human. Nevertheless, he concludes that appearance is irrelevant compared to ability and urges the spirit of healing, now revealed to be the young man, to grant him its power. The young man, overwhelmed, internally wonders if he has finally died. We are introduced to him as Kim Ohjin, a 32-year-old veterinarian who spent 2 years in pre-veterinary studies and 4 more in veterinary school. At one point, a professor scolds him for dozing off in class and sharply wakes him up. After earning his license, he worked for 3 years as a veterinarian with meager pay. One day, a man visits his clinic asking for help with his pet, admitting he can't afford the cost. Ohjin, saddened, explains that the clinic is not an animal shelter. Eventually, Ohjin opens his own practice, naming it Kim Ohjin's Pet Clinic, though it is in such poor condition that he hasn't even fixed the broken clinic sign. The clinic sits empty, and he appears disheartened by his circumstances. His struggles worsen with mounting rent and loan interest, leading him to thoughts of death, until one night he hears a strange, disturbing noise while sleeping. He then wakes up in a strange cave, face to face with a massive dragon, and instantly realizes he has been summoned to another world. He wonders whether he died of a heart attack in his sleep, and is now in this surreal situation. The scene around him feels like a version of hell he once imagined. A freezing cave filled with gold and jewels, a terrifying creature, and a summoning ritual that resembles black magic, all while still in debt. In confusion, Ohjin asks the dragon what is expected of him now, to which the dragon calmly replies that all he needs to do is heal his pet. Ohjin imagines the pet must be terrifying, perhaps a 3-headed beast guarding the gates of hell. But the dragon gently asks Ohjin to treat his beloved child, and as the dragon moves, dust can be seen gathering on his scales. From beneath one of the dragon's wings, the pet finally appears. It is a small fruit bat named Catlas, with a withdrawn personality. Ohjin stares at the bat in disbelief, wondering if it really is just a bat. The dragon then asks what Ohjin thinks, if the creature looks cute to him, while Ohjin remains visibly unsettled by the entire situation. He quickly notices that the bat looks extremely weak and drained of energy. Instinctively switching into veterinarian mode, Ohjin begins asking professional questions about the animal's name, how long it has been raised, and when the symptoms first appeared. The dragon responds that the bat's name is Catlas, and that he has been caring for it for about a week. He adds that raising bats has recently become quite trendy, and we see a gathering of dragons proudly showing off their pet bats. The dragons chat joyfully among themselves, expressing pride in their unusual pets. The dragon explains to Ohjin that he chose to raise a bat because it seemed popular and fun, and he happened to find this little one stuck near the entrance of a cave, so he decided to keep it. This deeply frustrates Ohjin, as he despises pet owners who adopt animals merely because they've become fashionable. Ohjin asks the dragon about the bat's condition, and the dragon explains that it has not been eating properly, or consuming much at all. He adds that he hunts fresh creatures daily and offers the bat their blood, yet the bat refuses to go near it. The dragon had assumed that, like himself, the bat simply had refined tastes. Ohjin moves closer to the bat to examine it more thoroughly. He grows increasingly irritated by what he hears, recalling unpleasant memories of people who raise animals without knowing the first thing about them. The dragon then innocently asks whether the bat is suffering from a serious illness or merely needs higher quality blood. Ohjin snaps, clearly agitated, and explains that this is a fruit bat, a species that could never consume blood. The dragon is taken aback. He mentioned that other dragons had told him they fed blood to their bats, prompting Ohjin to erupt in frustration. He emphasized that there are various species of bats. The one in question was not a vampire bat, but one that feeds solely on fruit. Ohjin continued scolding the dragon, pointing out that he had unknowingly starved the creature due to his ignorance. The dragon, embarrassed, admitted that this was his first time raising a bat. Ohjin then criticized the cave's extremely low temperature, stating that the bat was practically entering hibernation from the cold. The dragon replied that he was an ice dragon and unable to create a warmer environment. The constant reprimanding left the dragon mentally drained. He wondered if the legendary spirit of healing always possessed such intensity. Ohjin went on to denounce the idea of keeping animals simply because it had become trendy, questioning whether pets were now treated like accessories. The dragon realized he had no adequate response and deeply regretted his actions. Looking down at the bat with a heavy heart, he acknowledged that, despite its small size, it was a living being, and that he had a responsibility to care for it. Quietly, the dragon approached Ohjin and stood behind him while Ohjin remained still, lost in reflection. When Ohjin turned around, he saw the dragon gently cradling the bat with great tenderness. The dragon softly apologized to the bat, admitting that its suffering had been the result of his selfishness and ignorance. He promised to bring fresh fruits immediately and vowed to return the bat to the place where he had first found it. The dragon affirmed that the bat's happiness far outweighed his own selfish desires and thanked it for staying with him. Ohjin was struck by surprise, beginning to reconsider his initial impression of the place he had deemed hellish. Perhaps it was more rational than he had assumed. The dragon then turned to Ohjin and expressed his gratitude for helping him recognize his mistakes. As promised, he stated that Ohjin would receive an appropriate reward for lending his power and asked what he wished for. Ohjin instinctively replied that, in his next life, he hoped to be reborn as a wealthy Arab oil prince, leaving the dragon utterly confused. Realizing the dragon didn't understand, Ohjin changed his wish and said he wanted to reincarnate as the rich son of a famous villain, which only added to the dragon's bewilderment as he failed to comprehend anything Ohjin was saying. Ohjin, still puzzled, began to wonder about the term spirit, which the dragon kept using repeatedly. Eventually, the dragon decided to gift him a magical tool infused with divine power, explaining that it could create anything he desired. However, he warned that the tool would not function if used with malicious intent, though he was certain Ohjin had no such intentions. The dragon thanked him once more, expressing deep appreciation for the help he had provided and wished for him to return safely. As Ohjin prepared to leave, he once again found himself confused, questioning whether this place was truly the afterlife. But then a realization struck him. He was experiencing something straight out of the fantasy comics he used to read. Growing nervous, he called out, asking the dragon to wait a moment. He shouted desperately just before being sent back, begging the dragon to grant him one final wish: to return to life. Then he hastily added that he wanted to go back to the early days of Bitcoin in particular. At that moment, the dragon was preoccupied with the idea of fetching some fruit for the bat. In the next instant, Ohjin suddenly found himself in a completely different place. He fell to the ground, deeply regretful for missing what he considered the chance of a lifetime to go back to the early days of Bitcoin. His regret grew as he thought about the things he could have wished for, like a golden plot of land in a luxurious area or stocks he had previously invested in that had risen in value. He wished he had been quick enough to think through his desires, only to realize that all he had received was a necklace. Mockingly, he wondered what he could possibly do with a necklace that carried divine power from a dragon who didn't even know how to use it. Pausing to reflect on the necklace, Ohjin sarcastically commented that perhaps the dragon had tricked him, as he hadn't explained how to use its power. Suddenly, a large man carrying barrels appeared and shouted angrily at Ohjin to get out of the way, prompting Ohjin to quickly move aside. Still dazed, he stood in place for a moment, puzzled by everything happening around him, and then heard a vendor calling out that his goods were extremely cheap, which only added to Ohjin's confusion. When he turned around, he realized he was in a bustling marketplace, filled with people and merchandise, and the surroundings were clearly unlike anything from his own world. As he stood still observing everything, a man brushed past him roughly, complaining about Ohjin standing in the middle of the road. Ohjin touched his shoulder, startled by how real everything felt, and began to question whether he had truly come back to life or if his soul had entered another body. Looking around from a higher point, he realized the place was completely unfamiliar, and he was confused, remembering that the dragon had said he would be sent home. Just then, a young fruit seller called out to him warmly, inviting him to buy some delicious fruit. He approached her and, still confused, asked about the place he had ended up in. She replied that he seemed lost due to his odd clothing and assumed he must be a traveler. The vendor explained that he was in a place called Belmore, located in the southern lands of Baron Doyle, an area not particularly known for its landmarks, but quite popular among travelers due to its abundance of inns and shops. When she asked where he had come from, Ohjin sarcastically said he was from somewhere very far away and couldn't stop himself from cursing the dragon over the misunderstanding. The vendor smiled and joked that he must be from a very remote village. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted when a nearby fruit crate toppled over, followed by the appearance of a massive rabbit-like creature that began devouring carrots with intense hunger. Information about the creature identified it as a giant rabbit named Elizabeth, known for eating excessively when stressed. Panic quickly spread through the market as people reacted to the chaos caused by the enormous rabbit. Ohjin turned to a nearby woman and, in disbelief, asked how such a creature could move freely in the city without any opposition. She told him it was Baron Belmore's pampered pet and advised him to flee immediately. Ohjin found it hard to accept that such a beast was being referred to simply as a rabbit, while the woman appeared frustrated that the day's sales had been ruined by the uproar. His concern deepened when he heard a sharp scream in the distance and turned his head anxiously. A small girl was crying out in fear, calling for her mother, while the giant rabbit, Elizabeth, loomed threateningly behind her. The rabbit opened its massive mouth, attempting to swallow the terrified child. Ohjin stood frozen in shock, questioning how something like that could be considered a mere rabbit. He then dashed toward the girl, trying desperately to save her. His confusion only grew, as he had never heard of anyone dying from a rabbit bite before. At the last moment, he managed to grab the child and pull her away from the rabbit's gaping jaws. Both he and the girl fell to the ground, and while checking on her condition, he was still trying to make sense of what was happening around him. Just as he tried to reassure himself that, at the very least, he had managed to save someone, he was stunned to see the rabbit charging at them once again. Ohjin slowly came to the sad realization that he might have doomed both himself and the little girl, and that they could very well die together at that moment. Then, pulling himself together, he told himself that it wasn't his fault, but rather the fault of the owner of the giant rabbit, who had irresponsibly let it roam freely. Suddenly, the necklace he carried began to glow and emit a strange energy. Amid his anger and muttering about the need to restrain such oversized animals, the necklace's power activated unexpectedly. The rabbit was completely caught off guard by the mysterious energy that suddenly bound it, as ropes of light appeared and wrapped tightly around its body, anchoring it in place. Ohjin stood there in shock, unable to believe what he had just witnessed, or rather, what he had just done. Everyone around him began staring in astonishment at the unfolding scene. Some onlookers started wondering whether this was magic, and if Ohjin was a mage, given how easily he had managed to stop the giant rabbit. The children around him were especially awestruck, now convinced that Ohjin wasn't just an ordinary traveler, but a sorcerer. Ohjin himself was deeply confused, uncertain of what was really happening or how he had been able to wield such power so suddenly. At that moment, a wealthy man appeared, rushing toward the giant rabbit Elizabeth and calling out to her anxiously, clearly worried for her safety. Turning to his servants in anger, he scolded them for failing to control a single rabbit and declared he would deduct from their wages as punishment. He then returned to the rabbit, speaking to it with excessive gentleness and pleading with it to walk with him again. However, when he saw that the rabbit was bound, he was struck by shock and fury, yelling to know who was responsible. His gaze landed on Ohjin, and he confronted him furiously, demanding to know what he had done to his beloved Elizabeth. Ohjin tried to apologize politely, explaining that he had been forced to restrain the creature due to the extreme danger it posed, pointing out that someone had nearly died because of it. The man became enraged, dismissing Ohjin's words and arrogantly insisting that his precious pet would never harm anyone. He ordered Ohjin to release her immediately. This pushed Ohjin into a state of seething frustration. He immediately classified the man among those pet owners he deeply disliked, the kind who always insisted their animals were harmless, no matter what. Then, with biting sarcasm, Ohjin lashed out at the man, asking whether, if he was so sure of his pet's innocence, he'd be willing to stick his head inside the rabbit's mouth to prove it. The people around them were visibly impressed and thrilled by Ohjin's bold words, especially the fruit vendor and her brother, who were secretly urging him to keep going. At that point, Ohjin turned his gaze back to the rabbit, observing it closely and trying to better understand the situation. He made an effort to control his anger, reminding himself that he was a grown, educated man who needed to respond calmly. He began contemplating the type of rabbit it might be, noting from its ears that it appeared to be a lop-eared rabbit, a breed not meant to be wandering in such crowded places. He explained to the rich man that rabbits are territorial and highly sensitive creatures, and asked whether he had noticed any aggressive behavior or signs of self-harm from the animal. The man, stunned by Ohjin's accuracy, admitted that the rabbit had recently been pulling out its fur repeatedly. Ohjin explained that such behavior was a clear sign of intense stress, warning that the rabbit might become seriously ill or even die prematurely if it continued. The man was shocked and deeply alarmed by this, asking in disbelief whether Ohjin meant that Elizabeth could die. Ohjin advised him to stop subjecting the rabbit to such strange outings. The man then asked how the rabbit would get the exercise it needed, to which Ohjin replied that it was entirely possible to provide that even indoors. He then questioned, with genuine curiosity, how the rabbit had even grown to such a massive size. Ohjin continued to explain gently, assuring the man that he understood his deep affection for Elizabeth, but reminded him that rabbits were extremely sensitive creatures. He added that affection alone wasn't enough. They needed proper care and a solid understanding of their needs. The man looked surprised and moved by Ohjin's words, admitting that it was clear he truly cared about rabbits. Embarrassed, Ohjin denied it, but the man went on to explain that people often mocked him for raising rabbits, claiming it was a hobby suited for noble women, and that he was genuinely happy to meet someone who appreciated rabbits as he did. The man then asked if Ohjin worked in animal care, and Ohjin responded hesitantly that he did, in a way. The man immediately ordered his servant to bring all his belongings quickly. The servant handed Ohjin a sum of money, and politely asked him to accept it, and to check on Elizabeth's health from time to time. The man then left with his giant rabbit in attendance, apologizing affectionately to Elizabeth and promising her rest and delicious food at home. Ohjin stood stunned, holding the money he had just received, realizing that this might not be the kind of place he'd visit often. In the next moment, people gathered around him excitedly, thanking him for finally putting an end to the giant rabbit's chaos. They rushed toward him, warmly welcoming and celebrating his actions, expressing their joy at his courage in confronting the arrogant baron. The fruit vendor approached him with a smile, thanking him and saying that, thanks to him, she could finally work in peace. She offered him a special discount on apples, but Ohjin replied awkwardly that he didn't have any money since he had just arrived in the area. She smiled and pointed to the money the baron had given him, remarking that money was the one thing the baron had in abundance. Ohjin opened the pouch in surprise to find it filled with gleaming gold coins. He bit into one to check its authenticity, and the vendor laughed, assuring him that those were indeed the standard gold coins used here. A rush of excitement stirred in Ohjin as he began thinking that if he could return to his own world with such valuable coins, universally valuable across worlds, he'd be in a remarkable position. His eyes sparkled at the sight of the gold, and he started wondering about real estate prices in the area. It suddenly struck him that this opportunity might be far better than Bitcoin, and he decided to open a second branch of his veterinary clinic in this new world. He also planned to use the profits he'd earned here to pay off the debts of his original clinic. Sometime later, Ohjin was seen sitting on a chair in what looked like an official setting, thanking a group of people for attending. The attendees appeared tense and uncertain about what was to come, while Ohjin explained that he hoped to select one of them for a certain task. Leaning forward slightly, he announced the beginning of the event, emphasizing that what was about to happen was a matter of life or death, an interview to choose staff for his animal clinic. Earlier, the Baron had approached Ohjin and asked if he planned to settle down in the area. Generously, he offered him a house, money, or even land to help him get started. Thanks to the Baron's generous support, the second branch of Kim Ohjin's animal clinic opened smoothly without any difficulties. Ohjin came to realize that the most important thing in life was to have strong, beneficial relationships, to the point that he found himself silently expressing sincere gratitude. "I love you." Upon learning of Ohjin's intention to settle in the area, the Baron personally prepared an entire shop for him, stocked with all kinds of rabbit care supplies. While cleaning and organizing the place, Ohjin expressed mild surprise at the sheer number of grooming tools for rabbits, but quickly dismissed the thought since it had all been provided to him for free. As he continued tidying up his new shop, Ohjin began to reflect on what remained ahead: successfully running the clinic and earning profits. However, a sense of unease crept over him due to how little he actually knew about this new world, especially concerning the dragon who had brought him here. He wondered whether he would need to find the dragon in order to return to his original world. With that in mind, he decided to search for a new employee who might be able to provide him with essential information. He hung up a job posting outlining the qualifications required to work at his clinic. Soon, the personal interviews for applicants at Kim Ohjin's animal clinic began. Seated before them, Ohjin asked the candidates to introduce themselves in order from the right. The first applicant introduced himself as Thomas, the second son of a prestigious family, claiming to be well-mannered, respectful, and physically strong. But to Ohjin, he came across as dull and lacking in personality, prompting him to give Thomas an average score. Ohjin noted on the evaluation sheet that this type of person lacked individuality, and that he preferred candidates with more distinct character. The second candidate, named Philip, said his family had been working with animals for generations, which piqued Ohjin's curiosity, leading him to ask what kind of work that involved. Philip calmly smiled and explained that his family owned a butcher shop, and that he had been working with animals since childhood, mastering the art of using knives. This response deeply unsettled Ohjin. He sarcastically jotted down a note on the evaluation form, recommending that the police be contacted, as he was highly disturbed by such a background. Then came the third candidate, whose appearance was so intimidating that Ohjin couldn't help but wonder whether the man had ever dismembered someone. Still, he decided not to jump to conclusions based solely on appearances, and politely asked what had motivated him to apply and whether he felt nervous. But the man suddenly erupted with intense enthusiasm, declaring that he had been searching for Ohjin for a long time and begged him almost manically to let him become his shoe. After that incident, Ohjin resolved to rely on appearances when judging people from now on. The third candidate began approaching Ohjin in a strange and threatening manner, repeatedly chanting the word magic, which caused Ohjin to feel deeply anxious and fearful. Meanwhile, the fourth candidate, a woman, sat silently observing the situation. She calmly asked when her turn would come, even as the third man closed in menacingly. Ohjin cried out to her in desperation, shocked that she would ask such a question so calmly while he was under attack. At that point, the woman wondered aloud whether she should step in and handle the situation herself. She quickly sprang into action, striking the third man with incredible force and saving Ohjin from the dangerous encounter, knocking the man to the ground. The third applicant collapsed unconscious after the powerful blow, and calm was restored to the room. With composure, the fourth candidate introduced herself as Selena. She continued speaking with confidence, explaining that she was a traveling animal expert skilled in first aid treatment. Ohjin looked at her with admiration and full confidence, and without hesitation, declared her hired with a perfect score. He shook Selena's hand formally, officially welcoming her to the clinic as a technical specialist. Later, Ohjin sat in his new clinic, enjoying the warmth of the sunlight as he took in the place he had just opened. However, the comfort didn't last long. He began to feel uneasy when he noticed that Selena had not arrived for work on time. Sitting in thought, Ohjin admitted to himself that perhaps he had been too hasty in hiring Selena the day before and started thinking about a suitable spot to hang a new job posting. Suddenly, he heard a knock at the door and assumed the employee who hadn't shown up on time had finally arrived. Ohjin opened the door with a big smile, welcoming who he thought was the staff member, and gently asked whether she had eaten lunch properly. However, he was surprised to find that the person standing there was not Selena, but rather a young stranger who laughed and replied that he hadn't eaten yet, then wondered aloud whether he should eat first. Ohjin, clearly confused, asked who he was. Despite the unexpected situation, Ohjin decided to receive him politely, invited him inside to sit down, and offered him either water or tea. The young man chose tea. As Ohjin began preparing the tea, he felt a great sense of joy, thinking to himself that this was the first customer of his clinic's second branch, what he saw as the first step toward paying off his debts. He was determined to succeed this time, having carefully studied all the reasons why the first branch had failed. He recalled how, at his previous clinic, clients would often complain when he advised them to properly care for their pets, such as brushing their teeth regularly. Back then, clients would grumble about how difficult such care was. Ohjin, quick to anger at the time, would respond with sarcastic remarks about their negligence, which eventually led to negative online reviews. Those reviews had deeply affected him, and he came to regret his reactions. Reflecting on that, Ohjin resolved to keep his temper under control this time and focus on offering excellent service. He then asked the young man about the pet he had brought for treatment. The young man pulled his pet from his pocket, a small red creature named Bojack, which he described as a cute little lizard. Ohjin examined the creature closely and felt relieved that it was just a normal lizard, after having feared that all animals in this world would be bizarre, like the giant rabbit. Still, he was puzzled to see the lizard in the young man's pocket instead of in a proper cage, and carefully asked whether it was in his pocket because it had destroyed its cage. The young man replied enthusiastically that it looked cuter that way, and that carrying it in his pocket made it even more lovable. Ohjin grew extremely frustrated by the young man's careless behavior and nearly lost his temper again, but managed to restrain himself with difficulty. Trying to calm down, he asked the young man in a composed tone why he had brought the lizard to the clinic, and whether it was sick. The young man explained that Bojack wasn't exactly ill, but was very weak and sensitive to the cold. Ohjin responded calmly, noting that such sensitivity was typical for lizards. The young man went on to say with some concern that the lizard's tail had fallen off the moment he grabbed it. Ohjin, clearly uneasy, replied that this was normal for lizards and advised him not to hold it by the tail again. The young man kept smiling as he asked Ohjin to simply make the lizard healthier. At that moment, Ohjin recalled the ice dragon, who had once come to him with a similar complaint about his pet, and realized once again that the problem always lay with the owners, not the animals themselves. Nevertheless, Ohjin decided to run a quick checkup on the lizard, as he didn't trust its owner, and asked the young man to hand it over. As Ohjin began examining the lizard's skin, he was puzzled by its condition. He eventually diagnosed it with a condition known as dissectitis, which refers to improper skin shedding. The young man appeared surprised by this strange diagnosis. He warned Ohjin that Bojack was a bit aggressive since it had lived in the streets, and told him to be cautious while handling it. Suddenly, the lizard's appearance changed drastically. Its eyes ignited with blazing fire, shocking and frightening Ohjin. In the next instant, the lizard launched a massive fireball straight at Ohjin, leaving him utterly stunned. Ohjin attempted to dodge the sudden attack from the creature in his hands. At the last moment, Selena burst into the room and tried to save Ohjin from the dangerous fire assault. Continuing the events, Selena looked at Ohjin with a serious expression, pointing out that he had nearly taken a direct hit from a fire salamander. She expressed her frustration, saying she almost lost her boss on her very first day at work. Ohjin was slammed against the wall from the force of the blow, visibly stunned and in pain. Still aching, he muttered sarcastically that taking the fireball might have been better than the hit he had just received. He then began examining the salamander, Bojack, the very first patient in his new clinic, and noted that he couldn't touch it directly, as it might release fire if it felt threatened. Selena asked if they had a fire-resistant suit, while the salamander's owner seemed fascinated by how beautiful his pet was. Ohjin asked him where he had gotten it from. The young man explained that he had found it on a mountain near his home, and with great enthusiasm said he had fallen in love with it at first sight and brought it home immediately. He then jokingly asked Selena if she was jealous of his pet, but she responded coldly, denying it. Moments later, Selena clarified that capturing salamanders in that region was illegal, as they were wild creatures and not easily kept by humans. The young man was shocked upon hearing that, and anxiously asked whether he could still keep it, admitting that he had grown very attached to Bojack. Selena firmly told him he couldn't, as it was against the law, but she tried to reassure him a little. She suggested a temporary solution, that they say they were only keeping the salamander for medical treatment and would release it back into the wild once it had recovered. However, the young man strongly rejected the idea of saying goodbye to his beloved Bojack. In a mix of sorrow and anger, he shouted that he wouldn't accept it. He suddenly bolted out of the clinic with the salamander in his arms, shouting that they should just leave him alone so he and Bojack could live together in peace. Ohjin was completely baffled by the strange behavior of the young man and wondered aloud what was wrong with him, while Selena suggested he might have simply gone home. But Ohjin burst out at her in frustration, asking how she could just stand there and watch everything unfold without doing anything to stop him, especially when treatment hadn't even begun yet. He then sternly ordered her to go after him at once. Selena, clearly nervous, agreed immediately. Still, the question remained. Would Ohjin succeed in his very first treatment? Meanwhile, life in town had become noticeably calmer and more pleasant, especially now that the Baron's giant rabbit was no longer around. A fruit vendor remarked with a smile that life was indeed better, so long as the giant rabbit was too busy playing with the Baron to cause any more trouble. But soon, a bizarre scene unfolded before the vendor's eyes, the young man sprinting down the street with Selena and Ohjin chasing closely behind. The young man looked terrified, clutching Bojack tightly, while Selena and Ohjin raced to catch up. Ohjin, completely exhausted from the chase, could barely speak as he pleaded with the young man to stop. Watching the strange scene, the fruit vendor quietly muttered in fear that she had no idea what was going on, but she'd rather not get involved or ask. The young man, overwhelmed with fear, ran while wondering in deep sadness why they were chasing him and trying to take Bojack away. As he ran, he began to cry, holding Bojack tightly and promising that he would never let anyone separate them. Ohjin, furious and completely worn out, shouted at the top of his lungs, trying to convince the young man to stop because Bojack urgently needed to shed his skin. Eventually, Ohjin came to a stop, leaning against a wall, panting heavily, with Selena standing next to him. She commented sarcastically that he really needed to exercise a bit more. Then, shifting to a serious tone, she asked if Bojack truly hadn't shed his skin, as he claimed. Ohjin, still catching his breath, confirmed it was true, explaining that 2 or 3 layers of skin had built up and needed to be removed immediately. Selena became visibly worried upon hearing this and firmly stated that they needed to act fast, prompting Ohjin to question why she was suddenly so alarmed. She began to explain the severity of the situation, saying that when a salamander fails to shed its skin, fire builds up inside its body. Once that fire reaches a critical level and the salamander can no longer endure it, the result would be a dangerous explosion. Meanwhile, the young man was still running, clutching Bojack tightly, his face filled with fear, while Selena continued explaining that such an explosion could result in a devastating catastrophe. Ohjin agreed with her, clearly expressing his concern that the salamander's explosion wouldn't just harm its owner, it could destroy the entire area. Tension and anxiety were written all over Ohjin's face as he said they had to find the salamander quickly before it was too late. At that moment, the young man reached his home and locked the door behind him, feeling a bit reassured, thinking that he was finally safe and no one would catch up with him. He spoke to Bojack with relief, telling him they were now safe, and once again promised that no one would ever separate them. Overwhelmed with emotion, he decided to celebrate the moment by composing a song and began looking for a piece of paper to write the lyrics. During that time, strange signs began to appear on Bojack. His body emitted an unnatural glow, indicating that an explosion was imminent. But the young man, lost in his excitement over the song, didn't notice. He continued singing enthusiastically, pouring his feelings into lyrics about the power of love. Just then, Bojack's body ignited in a terrifying blaze, his eyes glowing with intense fire. The young man, smiling innocently, turned to him and asked how he liked the song. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted from the fire building up inside the salamander, and a giant fireball blasted toward the young man. He was thrown to the floor by the force of the blast, writhing in pain and struggling to understand what had just happened. When he came to, the room around him was engulfed in flames, and he was overcome with panic and disbelief. He turned to Bojack, shouting in confusion, asking what had happened and whether Bojack had caused the fire. He cautiously approached the salamander, his voice filled with fear, asking why it had gotten so angry and why it had set the place ablaze. Slowly reaching out his hand, he said they had to get out quickly, as the situation had become dangerous. But Bojack responded aggressively. His fire flared up again, signaling another attack. He launched a fireball directly at the young man, who stood there in disbelief, insisting that Bojack would never hurt him because they were family. At the last second, Ohjin heroically intervened, saving the young man from the salamander's deadly attack and grabbing the creature with his bare hands, trying to restrain it. Bojack flared up in Ohjin's hands, fiercely resisting. Alarmed, Ohjin shouted to Selena, asking if the salamander's rampage meant it would now attack humans too. Selena confirmed that it had completely lost control, and if they didn't calm it down soon, it would unleash even more fire, making it absolutely necessary to stop it immediately. Ohjin, still holding the struggling creature, was deeply confused, unsure how to calm it in such a violent state. The flames surrounding Bojack grew more intense, and the situation became increasingly dangerous. At that critical moment, the magical pendant given to Ohjin by the dragon began to glow brightly, radiating with mystical energy. Suddenly, an item Ohjin had been thinking about, a fire extinguisher, appeared before him, conjured by the pendant's magic. He was stunned by what had just occurred, his face filled with astonishment. Without hesitation, he began using the fire extinguisher on the salamander, trying to put out the flames and take control of the situation. After a few bursts of the extinguisher, Bojack's appearance changed dramatically. He transformed into a small, gentle white creature, visibly confused and no longer raging. Holding the extinguisher, Ohjin was surprised and admitted that the pendant from the dragon was proving to be extremely useful. Meanwhile, the flames inside the house began to die down gradually. Selena approached the young man to reassure him that things were now somewhat under control and gently asked if he was all right. Still in shock, the young man muttered the word rampage in disbelief, struggling to grasp what had just taken place. Then, as realization dawned on him, he sadly admitted that this explained why Bojack had attacked. If he had let him shed his skin, none of this would have happened. But with a renewed sense of optimism, he said it was good that he now understood, and promised that, from now on, he would take better care of the salamander. Ohjin, watching this unexpectedly cheerful reaction, couldn't help but be surprised by the young man's simplicity. Ohjin, both angry and bewildered, asked the young man if that was really all he had to say after everything that had happened. The young man, clearly confused and flustered, didn't know how to respond. Trying to calm Ohjin, he said that his feelings toward the salamander had never changed, and that they could simply rebuild the house. Ohjin exploded in frustration, raising his voice as he told him that, had the fire continued even a little longer, it could have spread to the neighboring houses and harmed others. Being safe himself wasn't enough. The young man, anxious, replied that this was why he had said he would take better care of the salamander from now on, asking if that wasn't what mattered now. Ohjin had nothing left to say. He simply placed his hand on his face and sighed in deep exasperation. Then he began explaining calmly that wild animals shouldn't be raised recklessly, as they have their own environments and natural habitats. Selena added that bringing animals home just because they're cute without understanding their nature or needs was a mistake, and asked if he really considered that to be love. Ohjin then asked whether the young man was confident he could control the salamander if it ever lost control again. The young man, saddened and hesitant, admitted that he couldn't. Ohjin gently but firmly explained that love and affection alone were not enough to properly care for an animal. A heavy silence fell over them, as the three stood still, each lost in thought. Later, Ohjin and Selena brought the salamander back to the forest to return it to its natural environment. Ohjin remarked that Bojack looked healthier now after shedding his skin, and Selena agreed, adding that he looked good too. At that moment, the salamander revealed its true form, larger and more powerful, now that it had cast off its old skin, leaving both Ohjin and Selena astonished. Ohjin, staring in disbelief, wondered how such a large body had fit inside the small skin. Selena replied calmly that this was the mystery of nature. The young man gazed at the salamander with sorrow, thinking that now it had grown so big it wouldn't need his help anymore. Deeply moved, he reflected that Bojack was returning to the vast embrace of nature. Smiling through tears, he told the salamander that he wished him happiness and that he was letting him go because he loved him. He then broke down, crying loudly as he told the salamander to eat well, sleep well, and remember him from time to time. He promised to come every day to leave him food, but Ohjin advised against it, warning that such behavior would erase the salamander's natural instincts. As the young man continued to cry, the salamander darted into the forest, while the young man whispered to himself that he would always be with him in spirit. He wept loudly as he watched Bojack run swiftly toward his freedom. Selena gently comforted the young man, explaining that salamanders didn't understand the idea of having an owner, and that he shouldn't be sad about the abrupt farewell. Then, perhaps a bit coldly, she added that the salamander had likely seen him only as someone who brought it food. This only deepened the young man's despair, and he questioned whether that was truly what Selena called comfort. The three of them sat in the forest, the young man still crying bitterly. Ohjin joked that maybe the salamander had thought of him as someone who cleaned up after him too. Just then, the salamander appeared atop a rock, gathering its energy to form a massive fireball. A powerful explosion followed as the salamander released its flames, drawing everyone's attention in astonishment. From the blast, a display of colorful fireworks lit up the sky, an unexpected spectacle caused by Bojack's unique abilities. Ohjin and Selena watched the fireworks with fascination, while the young man looked on, deeply moved and amazed by what his beloved Bojack had done, proudly commenting on the stunning show. He then looked up at the sky with a joyful smile, praising the salamander as incredible. It was at that moment that the successful treatment of the clinic's first patient, the fire salamander, was officially marked. Sometime later, in a public square near a fountain, people had gathered to enjoy the lively atmosphere and music being performed by a local entertainer. The young man appeared on stage, singing passionately and introducing himself as the singer, Roisha. He sang about Ohjin, describing him as the great wizard who defeated the Lord's giant rabbit and opened his eyes like a true poet. Next to him, a children's choir joined in, singing cheerfully about Ohjin, saying that he loved animals and that his touch was like a mother's, making everyone feel better. A percussionist joined the performance, adding to the energy and excitement of the crowd. At that moment, some people in the audience made sarcastic remarks about the singer, and Selena, puzzled, questioned whether he was truly the talented artist everyone claimed him to be. While Ohjin stood among the spectators, bewildered by the strange song, those around him began excitedly asking about the identity of the wizard being praised in the lyrics. It suddenly hit Ohjin that the song had brought him a great deal of fame, and now many people wanted to visit his clinic after hearing it. Days later, crowds gathered in front of Kim Ogun's animal clinic, banging on the door and shouting to know when it would open, demanding treatment from him. Inside, Ohjin sat overwhelmed, clutching his head from the stress and headaches caused by the non-stop wave of clients. Selena stood nearby, asking if she could resign due to sheer exhaustion. though she also admitted the clinic was experiencing unprecedented success. In the days that followed, the steady flow of patients didn't stop. Ohjin began to feel severely worn out from the constant work, and his demeanor became intimidating during consultations due to the pressure. With a tired smile, he politely told a client to return next week for a follow-up, while internally lamenting that he might be dead from exhaustion before then. Selena laughed and told him to make as much money as he could now, to which Ohjin, drained, replied that he also needed to survive as long as possible, then asked her to bring in the next patient. 2 months after the clinic's opening, thanks to the viral song, it remained packed with clients, much to Ohjin's amazement. Despite the difficulties of the early days, the profits had been excellent, bringing great joy to both Ohjin and Selena. At that moment, a new visitor entered and politely asked if the clinic was still open. Though exhausted, Ohjin welcomed him in with a smile, calling it financial healing. During this time, Ohjin had come to notice that this world wasn't all that different from his own when it came to raising animals. Outside, people casually discussed their pets' health, just like they would have back in his original world. The townsfolk raised cats and dogs and cared deeply for their well-being, mirroring the behavior he was used to. However, despite the similarities, Ohjin found the species here to be slightly different, and this subtle difference added to his fatigue. While he was lying down, completely drained, Selena told him that the next patient would be the last one, which brought him some relief. He asked about the type of animal awaiting treatment, and Selena replied that its name was Shaman, a breed of hunting dog that had recently become popular as a trendy pet. Ohjin expressed his disapproval of people adopting animals just for fashion trends, wishing those kinds of owners would simply disappear. Selena warned Ohjin that this breed was known for being extremely aggressive toward anyone who wasn't its owner, and that its claws and fangs were sharp enough to pierce the hide of a wild boar with ease. Despite the intimidating description, Ohjin greeted the pet owner kindly as he entered the room. When the cage was opened, a small, adorable white puppy emerged, shaking violently and clearly terrified, despite the breed's reputation for aggression. Selena then casually mentioned that she had forgotten to say the dog was only 3 months old, which took Ohjin by surprise. The owner nervously asked if the dog might be injured, since it had been limping since the previous day, while Ohjin silently wondered where the little dog's legs even were. He began examining the puppy carefully to determine the cause of the limp. Thinking to himself that a 3-month-old's joints should be in good shape, he soon noticed something odd. He found a small thorn lodged in the dog's paw, and the puppy let out a soft whimper of pain. Gently removing the thorn, Ohjin reassured the owner that it had just been a minor issue, and that the dog would be perfectly fine now. Ohjin carefully disinfected the injured area, while the puppy looked content and relaxed after the thorn was removed. Watching the little dog play on the table like a ball of fluff filled Ohjin with joy. He smiled, satisfied, while Selena silently observed him. The dog's owner left the clinic visibly relieved and happy, and at last Ohjin let out a deep sigh of relief, saying he had finally finished work for the day. Selena looked at Ohjin, who was lying back on his desk, and told him that he seemed especially cheerful today, which caught him slightly off guard. She asked if his happiness came from how cute the dog was, or simply because he was done with work, gazing at him with curiosity. Irritated, Ohjin asked why she even cared, but she coolly replied that she was just glad to see him happy for reasons that had nothing to do with money. This led Ohjin to accuse her of mocking him again, as usual. He then calmly explained that his happiness came from the fact that none of the animals he had treated that day were seriously injured. He remembered to himself that the hardest part of being a veterinarian was constantly seeing sick or suffering animals. The more he cared about them, the more it hurt, which was why, in the past, he had tried to suppress his emotions and act more detached. But he never truly succeeded. He recalled a past incident involving a client who had left her sick pet with him for an extended period while she went on vacation, which had deeply infuriated him. Since then, Ohjin had developed a habit of treating pet owners more sternly than before. At the end of the day, he asked Selena to quickly tidy up so they could close the clinic before nightfall. But suddenly, a strange man appeared at the window, staring eerily and knocking forcefully on the glass. The man began shouting frantically, calling for Ohjin and desperately asking for help. Startled by the man's appearance, Ohjin jokingly asked Selena if she knew how to exorcise evil spirits, to which she suggested brute force instead. Suddenly, the man burst through the window, screaming for urgent assistance. He rushed in and grabbed Ohjin, dragging him outside in a frenzy. Selena stayed behind, watching the scene through the window in complete bewilderment. Ohjin collapsed to the ground, exhausted from being yanked out so suddenly, while the man quickly apologized. The man sarcastically commented on Ohjin's lack of physical fitness and his inability to climb a hill, prompting Ohjin to tell him angrily to shut up. When Ohjin asked who he was, the man apologized again, saying he had forgotten to introduce himself. He introduced himself as Schwein, a local civil servant in charge of the area. Suddenly, Schwein dropped to his knees and begged Ohjin for help, saying he had heard about how Ohjin once managed to calm the Lord's giant rabbit. In a state of desperation, Schwein pleaded with Ohjin to help them capture a stray dog, leaving Ohjin puzzled by the strange request. Ohjin, supported by Selena, clarified that they weren't an animal rescue team. He was just a vet, and he didn't go around chasing animals. But Schwein continued begging, telling Ohjin that he was their only hope now. Ohjin, confused, asked when exactly he became anyone's last hope, and Schwein sorrowfully replied that they genuinely didn't have any time left. Selena, baffled, asked what he meant by time, prompting Schwein to explain that around 2 months ago, a dog had taken control of a specific area in the mountains. He went on to say that the area the dog had claimed was part of the route for a planned road construction project, and despite multiple attempts, they had failed to catch it due to its incredible speed. Ohjin, concerned, asked what would happen if they couldn't catch the dog in time. Schwein explained that the government would send official forces to take over the situation, and if the animal proved too difficult to capture, it would be killed immediately. The revelation that the dog would be executed shocked Ohjin deeply. Schwein began pleading again, more urgently than before, repeating that they were out of time and begging for help once more. As he stood there in desperation, Ohjin and Selena remained silent, caught in a moment of serious reflection. Ohjin stood silently for a moment, overwhelmed by a mix of confusion and concern about the situation. Eventually, he let out a sigh and scratched his head in frustration, asking Schwein where the dog was currently located. Ohjin clarified again that he was a veterinarian, not someone who had ever captured animals before, but admitted that he at least needed to take a look at the dog in order to form a suitable plan. Schwein was overjoyed to hear this, and eagerly informed him that the dog was nearby, just a little higher up the slope. Still, Ohjin emphasized that he hadn't officially agreed to help yet. He was just going to assess the situation first. Selena, however, thought to herself that it was already obvious Ohjin had made up his mind to help. When they reached the location, Schwein pointed out the exact spot, explaining that the dog never left that area. Ohjin and Selena exchanged uneasy glances as they spotted the dog in the distance. The dog appeared extremely intimidating, baring its teeth and growling aggressively. Ohjin turned to Selena and, with concern, asked if this was the same shaman breed she had mentioned earlier. Selena confirmed it was. The dog stood before them in a pitiful state, covered in dirt, visibly exhausted and furious. Selena looked at Ohjin and once again explained that many people had recently started adopting this breed just because it was trendy. She added with a detached tone that many owners abandoned them just as quickly as they acquired them, leaving these animals homeless and angry. The dog remained in a defensive stance, clearly ready to attack, which heightened Ohjin's anxiety. Looking at the dog with sorrow, he thought to himself that it was obvious the animal hadn't eaten properly for the past 2 months, given its thin, worn-out condition. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from a distance, catching everyone's attention as they turned to locate the source. Ohjin noticed slow, deliberate footsteps approaching, and he began to wonder if there was another creature nearby besides the dog. At that moment, the dog became even more aggressive and let out a loud, fierce bark. Without warning, it charged at Ohjin with incredible speed, attacking him violently and catching him off guard. Selena quickly grabbed Ohjin and pulled him away from the dog's charge, shouting that what he had just done was extremely dangerous. As they ran, Selena explained that the worst thing one could do when facing an aggressive dog was to flee and turn their back on it. Ohjin shouted back sarcastically, asking if she meant he should have just stood there and let the dog maul him to death. But Selena quickly responded that running only excites the dog more, and that they needed to find a way to distract it fast. Unexpectedly, the dog stopped chasing them, which surprised everyone and left them confused by its sudden change in behavior. Selena, puzzled, asked why the dog had halted, especially since it was supposed to be one of the aggressive hunting breeds. Schwein confirmed that it indeed was. Ohjin, bewildered, questioned why the dog had retreated when it had been so close and so clearly enraged. The dog slowly and tiredly walked back toward a nearby dark cave, its body visibly drained. Ohjin noted that it had returned to the exact spot it had started from, which piqued his curiosity even more. Selena calmly commented that canine behavior was often difficult to interpret, while Schwein noted that the dog had always chased people like this. He added that these repeated incidents were the reason villagers had filed constant complaints about the animal. Ohjin kept staring, deeply contemplative, without saying a word. After a moment, he asked Schwein what kind of complaints the villagers had made exactly. Schwein explained that they were mainly about an aggressive dog barking in the mountains, which people believed posed a threat, leading them to demand its removal. Ohjin then seriously asked if anyone had actually been injured by the dog, and Schwein hesitated before answering. After a brief, awkward silence, Schwein admitted that no one had been hurt so far. He confirmed that the complaints had only been about barking and disturbances, not actual injuries or attacks. Turning to Selena, Ohjin asked if she had previously told him that shaman dogs were known for their strong loyalty to their owners. Selena confirmed the fact once again. She then calmly asked Ohjin if he had figured anything out from the dog's behavior, but he remained silent, deep in thought. The next day, Ohjin and Selena headed to the village nearest to the mountain. Selena, puzzled, asked why they were going to the village instead of returning to where the dog was. Ohjin explained that their task now was not to capture the dog, but to find its former owner. Selena was surprised by this decision and argued that it would be faster to catch the dog directly since time was limited. She even suggested setting up a bait trap, assuming the dog was hungry. However, Ohjin responded that he didn't believe food alone would be enough to lure the dog. Surprised, Selena asked him why he thought that, and Ohjin explained that if hunger were the dog's only problem, it wouldn't be in such a poor state. He added calmly that something mattered more to the dog than food. Ohjin clarified his thought further, saying that the commands given by the dog's previous owner were probably more important to it than food itself. He imagined a possible moment between the dog and its owner, a scenario in which the owner left and told the dog to stay in that exact spot, promising to return soon. Back then, the dog had likely been happy and obedient to those commands. He continued his reflection with sadness, saying the owner must have told the dog not to leave the place. Selena added that she had met people like that in her own village too. Ohjin, filled with anger, expressed his resentment toward people who abandoned their pets while ordering them to stay, never returning. He said that if he ever found that person, he'd hit him first, then drag him along to show him what his dog had become. He emphasized the importance of making the dog's former owner see the consequences of his actions. Ohjin and Selena began asking around the village about the dog's owner. One woman complained that Gabriel's husband, a woodcutter, could no longer cut trees due to his fear of the dog. Some children said they didn't know the owner either, but mentioned that their mothers wouldn't let them go near the mountain because of the dog. Eventually, they encountered an elderly man who seemed confused and began shouting, asking which dog they meant. He angrily suggested they were talking about the dog that had taken all his money 10 years ago. Feeling exhausted, Ohjin sat on the ground beside one of the buildings. Selena approached and stood silently in front of him. She broke the silence by wondering aloud if the dog's owner might be someone from outside the village, then added that the only clear thing was that everyone in the village hated the stray dog. Ohjin, still confused, questioned how it could be that no one in the village knew the owner. But before he could finish his thought, a girl approached and interrupted, saying that the villagers indeed didn't know anything about it. She came closer and asked Ohjin directly if he was looking for the stray dog's owner, adding that he was the first person to ask about Jake. Surprised, Ohjin asked eagerly if she actually knew the dog's owner. The girl then asked him to come with her. Ohjin and Selena followed the girl to a house slightly outside the village. As they walked, she explained that Jake had lived away from the villagers, which was why no one really knew him well. When they arrived, Ohjin stepped forward and knocked on the door, thinking to himself that Jake must have lived there alone with his dog, far from everyone else. But no one was inside. The girl turned to Ohjin and gently told him Jake wasn't home, then asked him to follow her to another place. Still confused, Ohjin followed her, only to be shocked when they stopped in front of a grave nearby. It dawned on Ohjin with sudden weight that the place she had brought him to was Jake's grave. The girl began to explain that Jake had passed away 2 months earlier in a landslide accident, and she added sorrowfully that Jake had lived alone but was a very kind-hearted man. She continued saying that while the villagers had blamed the dog's owner, Jake had never abandoned his dog. He simply hadn't been able to return to him because of the accident. Ohjin stood in silent reflection before the grave, deeply affected by what he had just learned, while the girl continued speaking with sadness. She said she had tried to bring the dog back herself, but had failed. She went on, her voice trembling, to tell Ohjin that if he had come for that dog named Max, then she begged him to help. Ohjin recalled an old image of Jake and his dog Max, both smiling happily, and was deeply moved by the girl's plea. He stood quietly for a moment, lost in thought, then slowly stepped closer to the grave and wished peace upon Jake's soul. He remained still before the grave, while Selena and the girl stood nearby in silence, watching him. Afterward, Ohjin turned to the girl and sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding the villagers had toward Jake. Then, with a tone of seriousness and determination, he promised her that he would do everything he could to save Max, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, a group of soldiers arrived at the village earlier than expected to carry out their mission to kill the dog. Schwein was startled by their early appearance and pleaded with them to rest for the day and return tomorrow. But the soldiers responded coldly, saying their previous assignment had ended early and there was no reason to delay this one. The commander insisted they carry out the task immediately, telling Schwein sharply that there was no need to wait another day. He added indifferently that the villagers hated the dog anyway, so no one would complain if they killed it a day ahead of schedule. At that very moment, Max lay exhausted on the ground outside his cave. He appeared so weak and frail that he could barely move, while the soldiers began preparing for the kill. Ohjin and Selena entered Jake's house, hoping to find something that might help them reach the dog. Upon entering, Ohjin was struck by the strong scent of medicinal herbs, leading him to wonder if Jake had been an herbal healer. He looked around with growing interest, searching for anything that might assist in calming Max. Selena suggested they take something with Jake's scent on it, as it might help soothe the dog. She began gathering some of Jake's clothes, which were hanging on the wall. At that moment, Ohjin noticed a framed photo resting on a table. It showed Jake and Max together, both smiling with deep affection, and the image stirred powerful emotions in him. He stood there, eyes fixed on the photo, wondering how someone who had cared so deeply for his dog could meet such a tragic fate. Selena pointed out that Jake seemed to have been searching for the mandrake plant, which left Ohjin confused. She clarified what she meant by pointing to a wall-hanging image of the mandrake. Ohjin stepped closer to the image, puzzled, and asked about the plant, mentioning that he might have seen something similar in a movie. Selena replied that the mandrake was known for its piercing scream when uprooted. She added that it was a rare and extremely difficult plant to find, and every herbalist dreamed of discovering one due to its immense value. At that same time, Max sat outside his cave under a dark, clouded sky. Though he looked slightly better, he was still panting quietly and clearly fatigued. The scene shifted into a flashback. Rain began pouring down suddenly, and Jake rushed toward the cave with Max to shelter from the storm, remarking on how unexpectedly heavy the rainfall was. Inside, Jake sat beside a small fire he had started for warmth, deciding to wait until the rain stopped before leaving. He noticed Max shivering from the cold, so he pulled something from his bag that he had prepared for such moments. He wrapped the blanket around Max gently, telling him that he'd catch a cold if he stayed wet, and asked him to stay still for a bit. But Max began playfully squirming, bringing a smile to Jake's face as he laughed and called him a little rascal. Jake smiled gratefully, feeling lucky that they had found this cave to wait out the storm. At that moment, Jake spotted something strange and shiny on the cave floor, which caught him off guard. He hadn't known there was even a cave here. He moved in for a closer look and was stunned to discover a mandrake plant. Jake stared at the plant intently, excitement lighting up his face as he confirmed to himself that the shape and color of the leaves indeed matched those of the mandrake. Overwhelmed with joy, he exclaimed that he never imagined he'd actually see such a plant in real life, outside the pages of books. Filled with enthusiasm, he decided to rush back home to fetch his tools so he could properly extract the plant. He told Max he'd be back quickly. Max, sensing Jake was leaving, let out a sad whimper, clearly anxious about being left alone. Jake tried to comfort him gently, assuring him he wouldn't be gone long, and asked him to stay put. He promised Max he'd return soon and told him to wait inside the cave. With a cheerful smile, Jake stepped out, believing this was his lucky day. Max remained alone in the cave as heavy rain poured down outside, waiting patiently for his owner's return. Outside, Jake hurried through the storm, making his way toward home to grab his tools. The rainfall grew heavier as Jake pushed forward, determined. Suddenly, he heard a terrifying rumble, the sound of earth shifting, which made him freeze and look around in fear. Panic overtook his face as he realized the danger unfolding around him. A landslide, triggered by the relentless rain, crashed down suddenly, burying everything in its path. And it was this disaster that claimed Jake's life. Time passed, the fire in the cave went out, and Max remained seated inside, unaware of what had happened to his beloved owner. He continued to wait alone, sorrow written all over him. While outside, the skies cleared, and a rainbow appeared on the horizon. A week later, some hikers passed by the cave and were startled to see a dog sitting alone inside, still waiting. As they approached, they clearly saw how thin and abandoned the dog looked. Feeling sorry for him, one of them suggested they give him something to eat. But when one of the men moved toward Max with food, the dog suddenly became aggressively defensive. He bared his teeth and growled menacingly. Startled, the two men recoiled in fear. One wondered aloud why the dog reacted so violently, while the other warned they should leave the area immediately. They quickly left, muttering in fear and frustration that the dog's aggression made it obvious why his owner had abandoned him. Max, now alone again, returned to the same spot inside the cave, continuing to wait faithfully for Jake's return. Back in the present, Max suddenly raised his head upon hearing footsteps approaching in the night. A group of people with rifles was heading toward the cave. Schwein nervously suggested that it was late, and there was no rush. They should rest instead. But the soldiers continued moving forward and soon reached Max's location. The dog was clearly agitated and braced himself defensively. One soldier asked his companion if they had enough tranquilizer darts, and the other replied confidently that they had brought enough, knowing they were dealing with a dangerous shaman breed. Schwein approached them in a panic, begging them to give him just one more hour because he had hired someone to help save the dog. He tried to convince the commander, telling him the dog had a story and had never harmed anyone before. But the commander coldly replied that they weren't there to listen to sad stories about a dog. He added that, regardless of how touching the story might be, their job was to protect the citizens. With that, he raised his weapon and aimed it at Max. Max, confused and scared, panted anxiously as the soldier prepared to shoot. But at the last second, a hand grabbed the rifle and stopped him. It was Ohjin, hooded and calm, telling the commander that he was being far too hasty. Ohjin explained firmly that the dog could still be saved and asked them to wait a little longer. He looked at Max with compassion and called him gently by name, Max. Raising his hand slowly, Ohjin smiled warmly and told him that he had waited a long time. Max's tail began to move slowly, then started wagging faster and faster as joy overwhelmed him. He barked excitedly, his face glowing with happiness upon seeing Ohjin. The dog ran toward him, barking cheerfully with all his energy. Ohjin knelt and embraced Max gently, whispering with quiet sorrow that he was deeply sorry. for he wasn't the one Max had been waiting for all this time.